Our impact on the natural environment has never been so great as it is right now. And that means that animals are having to deal with really rapid rates of environmental change, and that's causing all sorts of problems. So biologists across the world are working on trying to understand what these responses are. My name's Oliver Tills, and I'm a research fellow at the University of Plymouth, and I'm a marine biologist. So I study animals that live in the sea. I think lots of people are fascinated by marine biology and by the beautiful animals that we see in the marine environment. But I'm not interested in the whales and the dolphins and the big animals so much. I'm more interested in the tiny things that you might walk over on the shore and not even notice. So I'm not talking about snails necessarily, or limpets, the big adult animals. I'm talking about the baby, very early life stages. So animals at the very, very beginning of their life. That's what I'm really fascinated by. The reason why I'm fascinated by that process, or by the early life stages, is that it's a time when animals can be really sensitive to what's going on in their environment. So not only are those animals having to effectively put themselves together, so build themselves from a single cell all the way through to sort of a fully formed animal, but they're having to do that at the same time as surviving in the environment and dealing with the changes that are happening in the environment. And unlike us as humans, which develop with a fairly constant environment inside a mother's body, marine animals are having to do most of their development without that protection. So they're developing out in the environment, and they're having to cope with what's happening out in that environment. So as a result, it's probably not too surprising that early life stages can be quite sensitive to what's going on. So they can be sensitive to what's happening out in the environment. And that means that it's really important that we understand how those early life stages are responding to the changes that are happening out in the environment at the moment. One of the things that's really fascinating about marine animals is that very early in their life, they can look remarkably different to during their later life stages. So, for example, a baby crab looks absolutely nothing like an adult crab. So you see an adult crab walking around on the shore, whereas baby crab has various life stages, including growing inside of an egg, all the way through to swimming around in the water column. So marine animals have really complicated stages of their life, or very different stages of their life. And that means that they can encounter very different environments. So sometimes they're on the shore, other times they're floating in the water column. So these early life stages are really important from the perspective that they actually look really different to adults. And they don't just look different, they actually work differently. So early life stages can work in a completely different way to the way that an adult works. So for example, the heart, which is a really important feature in, for example, a snail. So a snail on the shore, if it encounters an extreme environment, might change its heart rate to be able to cope with that. Very early in development, that snail won't yet have formed its heart. Or one of the species we work with, so a species that's really interesting, during part of its development, it develops two hearts. So it's got one heart, which it uses for coping with extreme environments, so stressful environments, and it's got another heart, which it maintains all the way through to when it's a fully formed adult snail that you'd see crawling around on the shore. So it's a really cool adaptation. So it's a really cool way of being able to deal with a stressful environment, to effectively grow an extra heart. So here at the University of Plymouth, what we're doing is developing new technologies and new approaches to trying to understand how animals develop. Now, animals develop during their early life stages, and that means that they're changing on a minute by minute, hour by hour, and day by day basis. So if, for example, you're doing an experiment, so you're looking at some animals under the microscope, and you decide that you need to go for lunch, the chances are you're going to miss some of what that animal's doing in terms of its development. Similarly, if you decide that you want to go home and sleep, the animal's still developing during the nighttime. So these animals are developing over days usually, sometimes even weeks. And so it's just not practical to be sat in a lab staring down a microscope for weeks at a time. And also, when we do science experiments, we don't want to study just one animal, we want to study lots so that we can get an understanding of what animals do as a collective rather than just individuals. So what we've done is develop new technologies, so effectively robotic microscopes, so robotic microscope systems that allow us to video the development of hundreds of embryos. And we can capture that whole process. So from the first cell division, so it's a single cell splitting into two, all the way through to that animal leaving its egg or transforming to become an adult stage. So we've built these robotic technologies and they allow us to understand how animals are developing. And what we're doing is trying to use those to understand how climate change or our effect on the environment more broadly, so maybe pollution or changes in the chemistry of the ocean, of the marine environment, trying to see how they change the development of these animals. So these robotic microscope systems allow us to simulate, so effectively to create environments that we think we might find in 10, 50, even 100 years' time to see how early life stages are responding. And this is really important because if an animal can't develop through its early life stages, it's never going to become an adult. So understanding the sensitivity of early life stages is crucially important. Now, these robotic microscope systems are allowing us to do some really interesting science. And what we're finding is that as you increase the temperature, embryos develop in a completely different way. So things happen faster, but they also happen differently. So if we think of three things that we see in a developing embryo, so one is it grows, another is that it changes how it moves. So very early in development, a ball of cells effectively spinning around, whereas later in development, the embryo has grown muscles, it's grown more complex organs, so it's grown a heart, and it behaves in a very different way. So what we've found is that the heart develops completely differently in higher temperatures, but also the embryo changes the process of development. So it changes how it moves, it changes how it grows its heart, and it changes how it grows. So really important to try and understand how environmental change linked to climate change is driving changes in these early life stages. So we do a lot of work in the lab, in the laboratory, using these robotic systems. But what we're doing at the moment is actually trying to go one step further. And I'm currently based at a science park, a local science park, and we're using technologies like 3D printing to take these robotic technologies and to shrink them down. And by shrinking them down and making them waterproof and making them more intelligent, so we're using something called artificial intelligence, which is effectively having a computer do the thinking for us. We can take these technologies and put them out into the environment. So we're actually able to take what we're doing in the lab and to put it out into the environment. So why is that important? Well, what it's allowing us to do is to measure how animals and how, in particular, early life stages are responding to climate change. So we can try to recreate environments in the lab, but that's our attempt to try to recreate something that's really complicated. So the environment is complicated and there's a huge amount going on and changing. So to try and recreate that in the lab is difficult. By taking technologies out into the environment and to measure what embryos are doing directly, we're able to start to understand how we are impacting those early life stages. So we're at the beginning of that journey, and we're developing technologies, and we're starting to understand how environmental change is impacting those early life stages. So hopefully I've convinced you that what we're doing in terms of trying to understand early life stages is really important, and that for understanding how we're impacting the marine environment, so the oceans, early life stages are a crucial part of that. Now, through our research, we generate loads of video. So we collect lots and lots of video of developing embryos. And we can't analyze all of that ourselves. So one of the things we're doing at the moment is actually using citizen science. So we're asking people to help us with trying to understand how early life stages are responding to climate change. So if you're interested in being involved in that, there's a website called Zooniverse. So Zooniverse has all sorts of citizen science experiments on it. It's a really exciting website. And our project is called EmbryoCam. So you can join in on that. Anybody can join in. You can ask us questions and you can get involved. And ultimately, you can help us try to understand how these early life stages are responding to climate change. And I think that's a really important mission.